You not heard of the OBG? Big people talk, man. You need to get involved. You might even catch a blessing.
Hi, I'm an OBG, and today I'm going to be talking about the Trivium. So, when you take a closer look at the education system today, you can see that it forces us to be compliant. Even the very method of learning by rote illustrates that we learn by repeating what we're told to, or we're punished. And the punishment comes in the form of letters ranging from A plus to F minus, allowing the state to categorise us and coerce us into filling roles as workers in the designated positions at anything from small businesses to corporations, places in which we receive enough remuneration to keep us attending regularly and at the same time paying tax in order to return some of the labour to the state, and as a reminder that we must comply and that giving up part of our labour to those in authority, assumed authority, is to be expected. And the idea that truth comes from authorities is instilled into us, and we are fooled into thinking that clever people are so by virtue of the fact that they remember dates, names, and places as taught by the school system, and that intelligence is the ability to remember and repeat. And this gives credence to the idea that accurate memory repetition is rewarded and failure to repeat or to comply is punished. Most people are taught to conform intellectually and socially, to blindly accept authority as truth instead of truth as authority, and they are taught to avoid any evidence that contradicts what authority pushes onto them with very strong emotional cognitive dissonance. And people are so sold into it that they will argue in favour of the negative education that they seek. And an example of this, and something that happened recently, is when people argue that they watch the news because they can see through the lies. It's all lies. You really don't need to watch such nonsense. And all excuses for watching it are rendered useless once your cognitive dissonance wanes and you admit to yourself that you are watching and believing nonsense. Don't watch the news. And anyway, I'll explain a little bit about the Trivium. And this is a combination of my thoughts and a topic from Servant of the Light, who's no longer active. So following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, this was in the 5th century, and I'm not sure that's been eradicated actually, but that's a matter for another show. Much of Aristotle's work on the Trivium was lost, and this was lost in the Latin West. However, the books of reasoning by Aristotle were available to the Arabs, and after 750 AD, Muslims had most of them, including the Organon, translated into Arabic, sometimes via early Syriac translations. And this method of reasoning spread widely throughout the Muslim world by the early 10th century, particularly through Al-Farabi. And it evolved further with Avicenna, who happens to be one of my favourite philosophers, and who, in contrast to Al-Farabi, went beyond Aristotle and developed an original and unprecedented logical system. So Avicenna was born in Cordoba in Spain, and he was better known as Ibn Rushdi, and he published commentaries on the works of Aristotle that became inseparable from the study of the philosopher himself. And the aim of the Trivium is to prepare a student to become autodidactic, which means simply self-taught in any subject, and it teaches you how to reason. Not like nowadays where we get a basic education up to a degree level and then go and find a job. And it was an expectation that parents taught their children the Trivium before they attended any school. And this is in direct contrast to the Prussian school of education, which teaches you what to think through memorization and repetition. And this is mass education through the what they call the illiberal arts. And that denotes education without culture or refinement, unscholarly or vulgar. And illiberal is a word meaning in Latin grudging concessions. So after the Muslims were driven out of Spain, and that was by 1492, the Christians found much of Spain to be enriched by international trade and productive agriculture. Publicly supported universities were flourishing with its intellectuals, they were thriving in areas of law, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and the natural sciences. So Western culture actually owes a lot to the Arab world for the survival of the Aristotelian philosophy. And throughout the so-called Dark Ages in Europe, the only works of Aristotle known were his logical treatises. Aristotle's writings were rediscovered and helped to usher in the 12th century revival of learning, which we know as the Renaissance, or Renaissance. And these ideas spread from its birthplace in Florence in the 15th century, and the invention of the printing press at the time also allowed for the rapid transmission of these new ideas. However, reasoned knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. Subjects of study can only be mastered and all falsehood removed if you understand the methods needed to reason, and this is essential to be a free soul. When the ability to reason becomes common or becomes commonplace, it endangers the authority of the accumulated wealthy elite who exist as parasites upon the masses through usury, privilege, and imposition enforced through the threats of arms and the use of force. The Prussian elite established a method to remove the trivium once more from Europe and ultimately the modern world, ironically even from the Muslims, by introducing the tax-funded and generally compulsory primary education, and that comprised of an 8-year course, and they call that Volksschule in German, and it means for common folk, common school, schooling, and this taught basic reading, writing, arithmetic, and through a basis of ethics, duty, discipline, and obedience to the state. The Prussian school of education is now the dominant method of education globally. The elite saw the advantage they could gain from the ability to reason and so established exclusive private schools based upon full comprehension of the liberal arts. This is what is known as classical education. And the elite imposed this method of education eventually upon every state corporation. For example, Horace Mann worked to create a statewide system of professional teachers based on the Prussian model, and that was in the USA, and that was as early as 1837. So the Prussian youth system is useful to the elite in creating not only a harmless electorate and a servile labour force, but also a virtual herd of mindless consumers. Now, I think schools generally do an effectively terrible, damaging job of teaching children to be infantile and dependent, intellectually dishonest, passive and disrespectful to their own development capacities. Seymour Papert actually said that, I nicked it from him. So, Robert Craig, who wrote the Medusa file, he said certain segments of the population must be programmed to be robotic drones, incapable or unwilling to think on their own. In this scenario, the individual is an enemy of the state. Individual thinking and choice are not conducive to peace and progress and are not permitted. Only by being part of the team can the individual follower accomplish objectives and outcomes. Of course, these objectives and outcomes are directed by the bureaucracy. This phase of population training is currently being accomplished by the public school system with such programs as outcomes-based education and the introduction of New Ageism into the classroom. And one has to remember that Adolf Hitler pioneered a similar tactic with his Hitlerjugend, and this was a state-sponsored school system. To quote the Führer, when an opponent declares, "I will not come over to your side," I calmly say to you, your child belongs to me already. Who are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing but this new community. So anyway, moving on to the Trivium. It's comprised of 7 liberal arts, meaning skills, where liberal denoted here in those subjects have studied considered free, like a free person, because liber means free in Latin. So literature. And that's encompassing the entire body of writings as a basis of learning, writing and grammar. Languages, a body of words and the systems for their use common to people, encompassing roughly 6,500 spoken languages. However, about 2,000 of those languages have fewer than 1,000 speakers. Philosophy, a lover of wisdom, the rational investigation of the truths and principles of being, knowledge and conduct. History, one who knows or sees, the branch of being dealt with past events. Mathematics, science, a group of related sciences, including algebra, geometry, calculus, and concerned with the study of number, quantity, shape, and space, and their interrelationships by using specialized notation. Psychology, the study of the soul, the science of the mind, or of mental states and processes. And finally, of the 7, science, and that is to know. Systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. Each of the 7 basic subjects are themselves subdivided. So this is the Trivium, and this is the 3-pronged thing which I have talking about. The Trivium, the place where 3 ways meet, the verbal arts. The order in which these areas of reason are investigated is vital, as they represent 3 ways: input, processing and output, and that's used to examine the evidence of our senses and establish who, what, when, where, why and how to. So number 1, of the three, grammar, the art of letters, traditionally the study of Latin and Greek, which greatly enforced or reinforced understanding of grammar and the workings of a language, and so that students could read the classics of Western civilization in the words of the authors. And the fundamental rules, who references what is the identity of the person or the persons involved in the objective reality. What references what is the identity of the subject, the concept or topic that's involved in the objective reality. And when references what is the identity of the time in the objective reality, followed by where references what is the identity of the location or place in that objective reality. Then number two of the three, logic. Now logic is concerning speech or reasoning, dialectic, and it's the science of correct reasoning. The ordered relationship of particulars in each subject that it is by combining the evidence of grammar and applying logic that creates what is referred to as rhetoric, or the expression of wisdom. Why? What is the identity of the cause? And that is the art of thinking without contradiction, being non-contradictory, identification of cause. How? And once again, I'll go through the how, why, what, when. What is the identity of the means or process which precipitates from answering the questions? How is a communication of knowledge and understanding or wisdom? And then number three of the trivium, rhetoric, that which is spoken. Debate and composition, which is a written form of rhetoric. Rhetoric is a counterpart of dialectic. It is concerned with finding all of the available means of persuasion. How the grammar and logic of each subject may be clearly expressed. If rhetoric is expressed in isolation, it's easy to be misled. This is why it is imperative that each of us becomes skilled in the three-step process. So this is something I discovered, many years ago, and I've always followed through, and I have a love of grammar, mathematics and rhetoric, logic and rhetoric. And there's also a quadrivium, by the way, and this is a place where four ways meet, the numerical arts, and it's used to numerically quantify the conclusions that we draw from the trivium. And I'll just keep this bit very short, and that's arithmetic, and that's a number of pure abstraction that is outside of time and space. Number two, geometry, numbers in space. Music, numbers in time. Astronomy, numbers in space and time. But that's a subject for another video. So the trivium, as you can see, it's quite important. It teaches us to reason, to think outside of the box, to contradict what we already know, and to move safely forwards. Excuse me. So what are we going to do about it? So what I suggest is just keep on learning, make sure that you take on board whatever you feel you want to take on board, rather than conforming to the societal norms, because people want to feel a part of something. Sometimes you join a small group, but everyone wants to feel that they're part of society. So if everybody's going down the wrong track and following or pursuing particular interests, we want people to think or believe that we're part of that and we share those ideas. And they're not always of benefit to us. We have to think for ourselves. And if you take note, go do some research on the trivium, then you see that those three key areas of study really do open your mind. And I had a little discussion this morning with a friend. I posted something on Facebook about taking small steps and being responsible. And the response led me to think that maybe that person didn't fully understand. But we have to take responsibility for who we are and what we do. And when we start taking those responsibilities, then we grow. It just happens automatically. You don't need, not that you don't need, what I say to people, don't look for the solution at the very beginning. Don't look for the conclusion at the very start of your quest. Know that you're on a quest. And if you become responsible, everything falls into place. You start taking responsibility. It just leads to, you start being more honest. You start being more truthful. You start realizing that there's much more to what you think you know. And it really does change who you are. And on top of that, I'd say study the trivium, look and see what it is and pick a little area from each. Do some reading on it. You don't have to become a scholar. Well, you are a scholar as soon as you start, to be honest, but you don't have to become deeply ingrained into it and go for a qualification that the state gives you and says this person's proven that they can study well, because a state-sponsored degree means all you've done is gone and studied for 3 or 4 years or 5 or 6, done a master's and doctorate and so on, and you're capable of reciting what the state wanted you to learn. Because don't forget, those courses are planned. But if you set out on your own quest and you go looking for education, just pick whatever you want. And I do think the Trivium's a good place to start. It's really been thought about by scholars of old, people with open, like greatly open minds, and they've passed that down through the ages. So keep on studying.
You not heard of the OBG? Big people talk, man. You need to get involved. You might even catch a blessing.
And on that note, thanks for listening. That was a live recording. I'll be doing much more of these morning, evening and afternoon shows. So the shows that I'm recording for Facebook, I'll do them live. You can see that I'm actually doing them live. If anyone wants to speak, do so now, or if I ever hold your tongue. I'm the OBG. I don't think people really know the true hypnotic power of television. You know how it pulls us in and just keeps telling us to consume. Buy. People really know the true hypnotic power of television. You know how it pulls us in and just keeps telling us to consume. Buy. And tells us to hate each other and separates us and causes the greatest divides, all under the name of entertainment. And every time I turn on my TV, it's just like no surprise. It's all of those programs and they're pushing out lies. And in between there's the adverts and they do it again. And they're trying to convince us that we're friends and have us trained like good little soldiers.